welcome to my brain. The product of 3.5 billion years of evolution and a few decades of living. It weighs only 3 pounds, but it's arguably the most complicated thing in the known universe. Along, of course, with almost 7 billion other human brains, including yours, inhabiting the skulls of people all around the planet. In there somewhere are all my thoughts, all my memories, all my prejudices, my ambitions, my knowledge, my loves. The words I'm speaking, just milliseconds before they come out of my mouth. So come inside my head. Let's see what we can find. Here's a human brain, happily not mine, wrinkled and beige and dense and unassuming as it's laid out on a bench at Emory University in Atlanta. They have a lot of brains here preserved for research. This is from a chimpanzee, a little less wrinkled and perhaps a third the size of the human brain, but otherwise not looking much different. Next in line is the brain from a monkey, even smaller but still familiar in shape. Finally, the brain of a rat. Until very recently, science knew much more about the brains of the rat and monkey than those of the chimp or ourselves. How much can you tell about the difference between us just by looking at the brain?
Not very much. Every little bit of cortex is like a very, very sophisticated bit of wiring or a very sophisticated bit of computer circuitry. And what we'd like to know is are those circuits the same or are they different? And if so, in what ways are they different? And how does that relate to differences in the way we think and act?
Most mammals have a cerebellum just as developed as ours. A rat's primitive brain is largely cerebellum. They don't need much more for their relatively simple lives. And in humans, the basic design of this rudimentary part of the brain has changed little as we've evolved. It is the rest of our brain that has enlarged so massively. Why did it get so big? Well, surprisingly, a whole quarter of our oversized brain is devoted to vision. Much more than for any of our other senses.
What you see when you peer into the back of the eye is the only part of the brain which is visible from the outside world.
It's not enough to look at the surface features of the brain. You've got to go inside.
Uh-oh.
But we're going to begin by looking for the spark in some much younger brains.
He says, "Oh no, Nora."
I'm visiting a lab at Harvard University that conducts ingenious experiments to find out what children know and what they don't. And right away, I'm in for a surprise. We're trying to figure out the human spark, what makes us human. Mm-hmm. And we certainly do seem to be very different from the other animals.
To say the least.
Yeah. So, are we born with something that right off the bat, it makes us vastly different?
I don't think so.
No?
This is a question that I've been trying to answer for the last 30 years or so. And for most of that time, my hunch was that we would see in infants systems of knowledge that human infants alone would display. But when we look hard at what a 4-month-old or a 6-month-old infant can do, we see very close similarities between the capacities of human infants and the capacities of infants and adults of other species. So I don't think that human spark ignites early in development.
Well, what would bring it about? Are we very reliant on this culture that we have?
I think that's a great question and one that's very debated right now. My personal view is that what's most central to the sparking of uniquely human cognitive capacities is our capacity for language, and that it's when children really get going on the task of learning language, learning their first words at 9 or 10 months of age, putting words together a few months later, that's when we start seeing these uniquely human capacities emerging.
It's kind of amazing to think about. How is it that I can sit here and spontaneously speak to you without actually pre-planning a whole lot of what I'm about to say? How is it you converse with your friends and neighbors just by taking what they have to say, inculcating it into your own brain, and coming out very quickly with information?
But what's actually happening deep inside the brain? It all starts with this tree-like structure, a single brain cell or neuron. Here is an actual neuron, magnified 10,000 times. Neurons are the tiny building blocks of the brain. They do something remarkable which prompts all our thoughts. They fire an electrical impulse. The electricity is bursting along the neuron at 400 kilometers an hour. Your brain has a staggering 100 billion of these neurons. Together, they could generate enough electricity to illuminate a light bulb. To make things more complicated still, the branches of each neuron are connected to thousands of other neurons. It's hard to grasp the sheer scale of all these connections. The optic nerve at the back of the eye is a direct extension of the brain. Traveling along the optic nerve, we pass right through the brain. Here, at the back of the head, is where the visual information arrives. Our eyes are just a window. We actually see with our brain.
And how is it we remember things?
There's a part of the brain that ensures memories can be stored for much longer. As certain thoughts are remembered over and over again, they are passed up to the cortex, the folded part enveloping the front of the brain. This is where our long-term memory resides. How these memories persist is not yet fully understood. But the best explanation is that memories are shared across many different neurons. Over time, the branching connections between these neurons are strengthened. This is how we remember our family and friends, the important events of our life. One estimate is that an average person can store in their brain 1 million different items. It's amazing to consider that I'm holding in my hands the place where someone once felt, thought, and loved. Now we can actually see inside a living brain. We can actually watch the brain at work. Here, I'm listening to music. Not one, but several areas light up. This part of the brain is where we process all sounds, and this is where we appreciate music.
How's the brain organized? Let's start with this plastic brain. Here's a skull, and inside the skull, surrounded by spinal fluid that cushions it, is the brain. The brain is divided into a right side and a left side, and then into lobes. So this is the right hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere. The lobes consist of the frontal lobe, which is more anterior. This area is important for what we call executive functions and memory and learning. Helps us plan, helps us sequence, helps us think through our ideas. Then there's a parietal lobe that's primarily involved in sensation and where we are in space, helps us integrate information. We have the temporal lobe, which is a banana-like area underneath the frontal and parietal lobes that contains how we hear, contains deep inside the hippocampus for memory, as well as language functions. And then we have the occipital lobe in the back that takes information from vision up here, sends it through optic nerves back to the brain to allow us to see. Then under the brain, what we see is the cerebellum, which helps us with our coordination and timing of things. And then we can see here the brainstem, and then finally here's the spinal cord. The brainstem contains especially, not only is it a conduit between the spinal cord and our muscles and sensation and the brain, but it also contains our regions for consciousness, for breathing, for managing our blood pressure. And the spinal cord that contains the nerves that eventually go out to the muscles to help us contract our muscles, as well as bring in information from our joints, from our muscles, from our skin about feelings of temperature, feelings of pain, feelings of movement, and help the brain integrate all that information. We can see the inner sides, and it's a little bit easier now to see the cerebellum in the back, the brain stem, and then leading to the beginning of the spinal cord, which of course is cut off but would go down your back. And we can appreciate the frontal lobe here on the inner side. In fact, this area right in here, in the back part of the frontal lobe, contains the nerve cells for the leg. And this part on the outer side contains the nerve cells for the hand and arm, for movement. And back here we can see that occipital lobe that allows us to see, not only see, but begin to interpret motion, color, size, and speeds of movement.